Chapter 3, Comparing Reality to its Alternatives. But then the question is who? Good Lord, said the barman, peering at Harry. Can this be? Harry leaned towards the bar of the leaky cauldron as best he could, though it came up to somewhere around the tips of his eyebrows. A question like that deserved his very best. Could I be, maybe, you never know if I'm not, but then the question is who? Bless my soul, whispered the old barman. Harry Potter, what an honor. Harry blinked, then rallied. Well, yes, you're quite perceptive. Most people don't realize that so quickly. That's enough, Professor McGonagall said. Her hand tightened on Harry's shoulder. Don't pester the boy, Tom, he's new to all this. But it is him, quavered an old woman. It's Harry Potter. With a scraping sound, she got up from her chair. Doris, McGonagall said warningly. The glare she shot around the room should have been enough to intimidate anyone. I only want to shake his hand, the woman whispered. She bent low and stuck out a wrinkled hand, which Harry, feeling confused and more uncomfortable than he ever had in his life, carefully shook. Tears fell from the woman's eyes onto their clasped hands. My grandson was an Auror, she whispered to him. Died in 79. Thank you, Harry Potter. Thank heavens for you. You're welcome, Harry said automatically, and then he turned his head and shot Professor McGonagall a frightened, pleading look. Professor McGonagall slammed her foot down just as the general rush was about to start. It made a noise that gave Harry a new referent for the phrase, crack of doom, and everyone froze in place. We're in a hurry, Professor McGonagall said in a voice that sounded perfectly, utterly normal. They left the bar without any trouble. Professor, Harry said once they were in the courtyard. He had meant to ask what was going on, but oddly found himself asking an entirely different question instead. Who was that pale man by the corner? The man with the twitching eye. Said Professor McGonagall, sounding a bit surprised. Perhaps she hadn't expected that question either. That was Professor Quirinus Quirrell. He'll be teaching defense against the dark arts this year at Hogwarts. I had the strangest feeling that I knew him, Harry rubbed his forehead, and that I shouldn't ought to shake his hand, like meeting someone who had been a friend once before something went drastically wrong. That wasn't really it at all, but Harry couldn't find words. And what was? All of that? Professor McGonagall was giving him an odd glance. Mr. Potter, do you know, how much have you been told about how your parents died? Harry returned a steady look. My parents are alive and well, and they always refuse to talk about how my genetic parents died, from which I infer that it wasn't good. An admirable loyalty, said Professor McGonagall. Her voice went low. Though it hurts a little to hear you say it like that. Lily and James were friends of mine. Harry looked away, suddenly ashamed. I'm sorry, he said in a small voice, but I have a mum and dad, and I know that I'd just make myself unhappy by comparing that reality to something perfect that I built up in my imagination. That is amazingly wise of you, Professor McGonagall said quietly. But your genetic parents died very well indeed, protecting you. Protecting me, something strange clutched at Harry's heart. What did happen? Professor McGonagall sighed. Her wand tapped Harry's forehead and his vision blurred for a moment. Something of a disguise, she said, so that this doesn't happen again, not until you're ready. Then her wand licked out again and tapped 3 times on a brick wall, which hollowed into a hole and dilated and expanded and shivered into a huge archway, revealing a long row of shops with signs advertising cauldrons and dragon livers. Harry didn't blink. It wasn't like anyone was turning into a cat, and they walked forwards together into the wizarding world. There were merchants hawking bounce boots made with real flubber, and knives +3, forks +2, spoons with a +4 bonus. There were goggles that would turn anything you looked at green, and a lineup of comfy armchairs with ejection seats for emergencies. Harry's head kept rotating like it was trying to wind itself off his neck. It was like walking through the magical items section of an advanced Dungeons and Dragons rulebook. He didn't play the game, but he did enjoy reading the rulebooks. Harry desperately didn't want to miss a single item for sale, in case it was one of the 3 you needed to complete the cycle of infinite wish spells. Then Harry spotted something that made him, entirely without thinking, veer off from the deputy headmistress and start heading straight into the shop, a front of blue bricks with bronze metal trim. He was brought back to reality only when Professor McGonagall stepped right in front of him. Mr. Potter, she said. Harry blinked, then realized what he'd just done. I'm sorry. I forgot for a moment that I was with you instead of my family. Harry gestured at the shop window, which displayed fiery letters that shone piercingly bright and yet remote, spelling out Big Bam's brilliant books. When you walk past a bookshop you haven't visited before, you have to go in and look around. That's the family rule. That is the most Ravenclaw thing I have ever heard. What? Nothing. Mr. Potter, our first step is to visit Gringotts, the bank of the wizarding world. Your genetic family vault is there, with the inheritance your genetic parents left you, and you'll need money for school supplies. She sighed. And I suppose a certain amount of spending money for books could be excused as well, though you might want to hold off for a time. Hogwarts has quite a large library on magical subjects, and the tower in which, I strongly suspect, you will be living has a more broad-ranging library of its own. Any book you bought now would probably be a duplicate. Harry nodded and they walked on. Don't get me wrong, it's a great distraction, Harry said as his head kept swiveling. Probably the best distraction anyone has ever tried on me, but don't think I've forgotten about our pending discussion. Professor McGonagall sighed. Your parents, or your mother at any rate, may have been very wise not to tell you. So you wish that I could continue in blissful ignorance. There is a certain flaw in that plan, Professor McGonagall. I suppose it would be rather pointless, the witch said tightly, when anyone on the street could tell you the story. Very well. And she told him of he who must not be named, the Dark Lord, Voldemort. Voldemort? Harry whispered. It should have been funny, but it wasn't. The name burned with a cold feeling, ruthlessness, diamond clarity, a hammer of pure titanium descending upon an anvil of yielding flesh. A chill swept over Harry even as he pronounced the word, and he resolved then and there to use safer terms like you-know-who. The Dark Lord had raged upon wizarding Britain like a wilding wolf, tearing and rending at the fabric of their everyday lives. Other countries had wrung their hands but hesitated to intervene, whether out of apathetic selfishness or simple fear. For whichever was first among them to oppose the Dark Lord, their peace would be the next target of his terror. The bystander effect, thought Harry, thinking of Latin and Darley's experiment which had shown that you were more likely to get help if you had an epileptic fit in front of one person than in front of three. Diffusion of responsibility, everyone hoping that someone else would go first. The Death Eaters had followed in the Dark Lord's wake, and in his vanguard, carrion vultures to pick at wounds or snakes to bite and weaken. The Death Eaters were not as terrible as the Dark Lord, but they were terrible, and they were many. And the Death Eaters wielded more than wands. There was wealth within those masked ranks, and political power and secrets held in blackmail to paralyze a society trying to protect itself. An old and respected journalist, Yermy Wibble, called for increased taxes and conscription. He shouted that it was absurd for the many to cower in fear of the few. His skin, only his skin, had been found nailed to the newsroom wall that next morning, next to the skins of his wife and 2 daughters. Everyone wished for something more to be done, and no one dared take the lead to propose it. Whoever stood out the most became the next example, until the names of James and Lily Potter rose to the top of that list. And those 2 might have died with their wands in their hands and not regretted their choices, for they were heroes. But for that they had an infant child, their son, Harry Potter. Tears were coming into Harry's eyes. He wiped them away in anger or maybe desperation. I didn't know those people, not really. They aren't my parents now. It would be pointless to feel so sad for them. When Harry was done sobbing into the witch's robes, he looked up and felt a little bit better to see tears in Professor McGonagall's eyes as well. So what happened? Harry said, his voice trembling. The Dark Lord came to Godric's Hollow, Professor McGonagall said in a whisper. You should have been hidden, but you were betrayed. The Dark Lord killed James, and he killed Lily, and he came in the end to you, to your cot. He cast the killing curse at you, and that was where it ended. The killing curse is formed of pure hate and strikes directly at the soul, severing it from the body. It cannot be blocked, and whomever it strikes, they die. But you survived. You are the only person ever to survive. The killing curse rebounded and struck the Dark Lord, leaving only the burnt hulk of his body and a scar upon your forehead. That was the end of the terror, and we were free. That, Harry Potter, is why people want to see the scar on your forehead and why they want to shake your hand. The storm of weeping that had washed through Harry had used up all his tears. He could not cry again, he was done. And somewhere in the back of his mind was a small, small note of confusion, a sense of something wrong about that story, and it should have been a part of Harry's art to notice that tiny note, but he was distracted. For it is a sad rule that whenever you are most in need of your art as a rationalist, that is when you are most likely to forget it. Harry detached himself from Professor McGonagall's side. I'll have to think about this, he said, trying to keep his voice under control. He stared at his shoes. You can go ahead and call them my parents if you want. You don't have to say genetic parents or anything. I guess there's no reason I can't have two mothers and two fathers. There was no sound from Professor McGonagall, and they walked together in silence until they came before a great white building with vast bronze doors and carven words above saying Gringotts Bank. Chapter 4, The Efficient Market Hypothesis. As others have noted, the novels seem inconsistent in the apparent purchasing power of a galleon. I'm picking a consistent value and sticking with it. £5 sterling to the galleon doesn't square with 7 galleons for a wand and children using hand-me-down wands. World domination is such an ugly phrase. I prefer to call it world optimization. Heaps of gold galleons, stacks of silver sickles, piles of bronze nuts. Harry stood there and stared with his mouth open at the family vault. He had so many questions he didn't know where to start. From just outside the door of the vault, Professor McGonagall watched him, seeming to lean casually against the wall, but her eyes intent. Well, that made sense. Being plopped in front of a giant heap of gold coins was a test of character, so pure it was archetypal. "Are these coins the pure metal?" Harry said finally. "What?" hissed the goblin Griffook, who was waiting near the door. "Are you questioning the integrity of Gringotts, Mr. Potter Evans Veres?" "No," said Harry absently. "Not at all sorry if that came out wrong, sir. I just have no idea at all how your financial system works. I'm asking if galleons in general are made of pure gold." "Of course," said Griffook. "And can anyone coin them, or are they issued by a monopoly that thereby collects seigniorage?" "What?" said Professor McGonagall. Griffook grinned, showing sharp teeth. "Only a fool would trust any but goblin coin." "In other words," Harry said, "the coins aren't supposed to be worth any more than the metal making them up." Griffook stared at Harry. Professor McGonagall looked bemused. "I mean, suppose I came in here with a ton of silver. Could I get a ton of sickles made from it?" "For a fee, Mr. Potter Evans Veres." The goblin watched him with glittering eyes. "For a certain fee. Where would you find a ton of silver, I wonder?" "I was speaking hypothetically," Harry said, "for now at any rate." "So, how much would you charge in fees as a fraction of the whole weight?" Griffook's eyes were intent. "I would have to consult my superiors. Give me a wild guess. I won't hold Gringotts to it. A 20th part of the metal would well pay for the coining." Harry nodded. "Thank you very much, Mr. Griffook. So not only is the wizarding economy almost completely decoupled from the Muggle economy, no one here has ever heard of arbitrage. The larger Muggle economy had a fluctuating trading range of gold to silver. So every time the Muggle gold-to-silver ratio got more than 5% away from the weight of 17 sickles to 1 galleon, either gold or silver should have drained from the wizarding economy until it became impossible to maintain the exchange rate. Bring in a ton of silver, change to sickles, and pay 5%. Change the sickles for galleons, take the gold to the Muggle world, exchange it for more silver than you started with, and repeat. Wasn't the Muggle gold-to-silver ratio somewhere around 50 to 1? Harry didn't think it was 17 anyway, and it looked like the silver coins were actually smaller than the gold coins. Then again, Harry was standing in a bank that literally stored your money in vaults full of gold coins guarded by dragons, where you had to go in and take coins out of your vault whenever you wanted to spend money. The finer points of arbitraging away market inefficiencies might well be lost on them. He'd been tempted to make snide remarks about the crudity of their financial system. But the sad thing is, their way is probably better. On the other hand, one competent hedge fundy could probably own the whole wizarding world within a week. Harry filed away this notion in case he ever ran out of money or had a week free. Meanwhile, the giant heaps of gold coins within the Potter vault ought to suit his near-term requirements. Harry stumped forward and began picking up gold coins with one hand and dumping them into the other. When he had reached 20, Professor McGonagall coughed. "I think that will be more than enough to pay for your school supplies, Mr. Potter." Harry said, his mind elsewhere. "Hold on, I'm doing a Fermi calculation." "A what?" said Professor McGonagall, sounding somewhat alarmed. "It's a mathematical thing, named after Enrico Fermi, a way of getting rough numbers quickly in your head. 20 gold galleons weighed 1/10 of a kilogram, maybe. And gold was, what, 10,000 British pounds a kilogram. So a galleon would be worth about 50 pounds. The mounds of gold coins looked to be about 60 coins high and 20 coins wide in either dimension of the base, and a mound was pyramidal, so it would be around 1/3 of the cube. 8,000 galleons per mound, roughly, and there were around 5 mounds of that size, so 40,000 galleons or 2 million pounds sterling. Not bad. Harry smiled with a certain grim satisfaction. It was too bad that he was right in the middle of discovering the amazing new world of magic, and couldn't take time out to explore the amazing new world of being rich, which a quick Fermi estimate said was roughly 1 billion times less interesting. Still, that's the last time I ever mow a lawn for one lousy pound. Harry wheeled from the giant heap of money. Pardon me for asking, Professor McGonagall, but I understand that my parents were in their 20s when they died. Is this a usual amount of money for a young couple to have in their vault in the wizarding world? If it was, a cup of tea probably cost 5,000 pounds. Rule 1 of economics, you can't eat money. Professor McGonagall shook her head. Your father was the last heir of an old family, Mr. Potter. It's also possible. The witch hesitated. Some of this money may be from bounties placed on you-know-who, payable to his Kai-Ah to whoever might defeat him. Or those bounties might not have been collected yet. I am not sure. Interesting, Harry said slowly. So some of this really is in a sense mine, that is, earned by me, sort of, possibly. Even if I don't remember the occasion. Harry's fingers tapped against his trouser leg. That makes me feel less guilty about spending a very tiny fraction of it. Don't panic, Professor McGonagall. Mr. Potter, you are a minor, and as such, you will only be allowed to make reasonable withdrawals from. I am all about reasonable. I am totally on board with fiscal prudence and impulse control. But I did see some things on the way here which would constitute sensible, grown-up purchases. Harry locked gazes with Professor McGonagall, engaging in a silent staring contest. Like what? Professor McGonagall said finally. Trunks whose insides hold more than their outsides. Professor McGonagall's face grew stern. Those are very expensive, Mr. Potter. Yes, but Harry pleaded. I'm sure that when I'm an adult I'll want one, and I can afford one. Logically, it would make just as much sense to buy it now instead of later, and get the use of it right away. It's the same money either way, right? I mean, I would want a good one with lots of room inside, good enough that I wouldn't have to just get a better one later. Harry trailed off hopefully. Professor McGonagall's gaze didn't waver. And just what would you keep in a trunk like that, Mr. Potter? Books. Of course, sighed Professor McGonagall. You should have told me much earlier that sort of magic item existed, and that I could afford one. Now my father and I are going to have to spend the next 2 days frantically hitting up all the second-hand bookshops for old textbooks, so I can have a decent science library with me at Hogwarts, and maybe a small science fiction collection, if I can assemble something decent out of the bargain bins. Or better yet, I'll make the deal a little sweeter for you, okay? Just let me buy. Mr. Potter, you think you can bribe me? What? No, not like that. I'm saying Hogwarts can keep some of the books I bring if you think that any of them would make good additions to the library. I'm going to be getting them cheap, and I just want to have them around somewhere or other. It's okay to bribe people with books, right? That's a family tradition. Yes, exactly. Professor McGonagall's body seemed to slump, the shoulders lowering within her black robes. I cannot deny the sense of your words, though I much wish I could. I will allow you to withdraw an additional 100 galleons, Mr. Potter. She sighed again. I know that I shall regret this, and I am doing it anyway. That's the spirit. And does a moleskin pouch do what I think it does? It can't do as much as a trunk, the witch said with visible reluctance. But a moleskin pouch with a retrieval charm and undetectable extension charm can hold a number of items until they are called forth by the one who emplaced them. Yes, I definitely need one of those too. It would be like the super belt pack of ultimate awesomeness. Batman's utility belt of holding. Never mind my Swiss Army knife, I could carry a whole tool set in there. Or books. I could have the top 3 books I was reading on me at all times and just pull one out anywhere. I'll never have to waste another minute of my life. What do you say, Professor McGonagall? It's for the sake of children's reading, the best of all possible causes. I suppose you may add another 10 galleons. Griffook was favoring Harry with a gaze of frank respect, possibly even outright admiration. And a little spending money, like you mentioned earlier. I think I can remember seeing 1 or 2 other things I might want to store in that pouch. Don't push it, Mr. Potter. But oh, Professor McGonagall, why rain on my parade? Surely this is a happy day, when I discover all things wizarding for the first time. Why act the part of the grumpy grown-up, when instead you could smile and remember your own innocent childhood, watching the look of delight upon my young face as I buy a few toys, using an insignificant fraction of the wealth that I earned by defeating the most terrible wizard Britain has ever known. Not that I'm accusing you of being ungrateful or anything, but still, what are a few toys compared to that? You, growled Professor McGonagall. There was a look on her face so fearsome and terrible that Harry squeaked and stepped back, knocking over a pile of gold coins with a great jingling noise and sprawling backwards into a heap of money. Griffook sighed and put a palm over his face. "I would be doing a great service to Wizarding Britain, Mr. Potter, if I locked you in this vault and left you here." And they left without any more trouble.